you'll notice that these are really strong lights, and that's our whole goal, is to be American made and to build the best, and to build the best here in St. Louis. So premium top bin horticultural diodes gives a superior PAR spectrum, and it maximizes photosynthesis. I guess I didn't really mention that where lumens come from. It was a 1/6 of a pound wax candle burning, and that single candle's light is one candela, which is one lumen. And then people had different candles and different styles of candles, and so they used platinum and divided it by 60, because platinum burning, it was at the exact same. It's not like the candles had a difference in burn rate or brightness. So they started burning platinum and then dividing that by 60, and that became the international standard for candlelight, or a lumen.
Cam, you're on.
All right. Hey guys, thanks for everyone coming out today. We're going to be talking about grow lighting, kind of the basics of what PARMAX are, what PPFD maps are, and what it takes to make a really good light. So, again, we're going to kind of make this an open conversation. If you guys want to jump in a little bit or ask questions, it's always great. So the basics of lighting. What is a PAR spectrum? Have you guys seen this before? Yeah? No? Okay. So PAR spectrum here is the waveband output that a light produces. So when a light turns on, it has a different spectrum depending on if it's a HPS or metal halide, fluorescent tubes, or LEDs. So Dazor makes LEDs with horticultural diodes, and it's got a wider red band range here. We'll kind of go into this a little bit of how that helps photosynthesis and the Emerson effect in this range. So by having a full spectrum light, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about full spectrum lighting, it allows the plant to photosynthesize properly through chlorophyll A and B, and then the anthocyanins. So the anthocyanins are located in the green area here, and then you have your peaks right here and at the 660, so about the 450 range and 660, and I will go into that in just a sec. So where did this all come from? Where did the PAR spectrum come from? There's Dr. McCree in 1970s created the McCree Curve, and essentially he measured the sun's output and wanted to figure out where the wave bands hit and how plants respond to that, how they photosynthesize with the sun's PAR spectrum. So here you can see chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B and the spectrum of sunlight overall. Now what we're trying to do when we're making grow lights for indoors is we're trying to create that full spectrum effect to give the sun, or give the plants essentially, indoor sunlight. So the Emerson Enhancement Effect, why more red equals results. So in Robert Emerson, after Dr. McCree, did some studying on different plant types and different algae, and he came up with the Emerson Enhancement Effect, and that's where plants actually utilize the red spectrum here. And so you can see this line right in here, and between the 630, 640, and 650 range, it peaks. And so that causes the initial photosynthesis to begin reacting in the plant cells. And then between 660 and 690, you get a secondary boost. And so there's an excitation of the molecules and the chlorophyll that allows that to start and then to carry over all the way into the 690 range. So when we're working with metal halides or HPSs, that spike in that wave band, it's very skinny. It just shoots straight up right here, sometimes even in the 800 range. And so it's not really capturing the full spectrum needed for the plant to photosynthesize at its as fastest rate and consistent. Do you guys have any questions about this part?
So is it better to have a shorter, like, red range than like a longer lasting red range?
It's better to have a wider red range. That's what really helps the plant to flower out.
Yeah,
Yeah, so your blue is going to be,
stage.
Right, mainly vegetative. And if you have too much blue overcoming your red, your plants will kind of squat down a little bit. So balancing those two out in the perfect PAR spectrum is really unique to making a really good indoor quality light. So PAR and lumens, this is where humans see right here. The term is kind of lumens are for humans, PAR is for plants. So, and Danny will go into that a little bit. I think we talked about lumens being for humans and the visible spectrum here. So humans will, there's 3 different cones in our eyes, and in this area right here and in this area right here, we use multiple cones to take that light and to kind of make this giant curve, and this is where humans will, lost the mouse, humans will mainly see right in here. So PAR is the photoactive, the part where photosynthesis happens. So it is the
Photosynthetic active radiation.
photosynthetic active radiation. Thank you. I was totally blanking on that right there. Yeah, so it's the photosynthetic active radiation. So it's the electromagnetic wave band where the plant is utilizing it in its different cells to photosynthesize. And again, this is the human spectrum here overlaid over Dazor's PAR spectrum. So this light that you see right here, it has horticultural diodes in it that create that spectrum that are of high quality. And we'll get into the quality of putting together a really good light here at the end. So again, in the 420 range, 434 and 464 is where humans use light. And this is actually how plants photosynthesize. So your chlorophyll A and your chlorophyll B right here, that's going to be in that Emerson Enhancement Effect range, so in that red. And then your carotenoids and your anthocyanins are in here, which anthocyanins and flavonoids, your flavor, your terpenes, those are going to come a little bit in that green, but you really don't need that much green in the whole spectrum. And then here we see a nice large peak in chlorophyll B, so that's when the plant is vegging up and creating its leaf mass. This is the absorption spectrum overlaid over the different parts of the plant here. So you can see how wide that is again, where it needs to be in order to photosynthesize properly and to create really dense flowers. Do you guys have any questions on this part?
Do the plants need any green, or if they just, looking at that other chart, do they just need blue and red?
Thanks for segueing right into that. How much green light do we need? That's the next slide here. So again, you can see on the last one here, you don't see that purple line for anthocyanin. Anthocyanins are going to be the purple colors, the blue colors, the pink colors that come out in that plant. And we really just need a touch of green in order to make that work. So you'll notice that different lights have a lot more green, and they're not really using the power input that's turning into the photon in a more efficient manner. So your B carotene here and your chlorophyll A here. And so this is going to be your flavor and your color, and this is going to be your density and your flower, and then the other reaction centers. So we can talk about ePAR. Initially we started with PAR, and that came from the McCree Curve, understanding where the plant reacts to it. With further research through Dr. Bugbee here, we've extended that range from 400 nanometers, which it was 400 to 700 nanometers. Now it's 400 to 750 nanometers. So using a little bit of that further red or far red light in conjunction with that Emerson Enhancement Effect is what gives us a proper photosynthesis. I'm going to click on this here. Oh. And this is Dr. Bruce Bugbee going over photosynthesis and explaining it.
These are two slides that into the weeds on the biochemistry of photosynthesis. This isn't just an experimental measurement. It's supplemented with a lot of detailed theoretical considerations. And I'll walk you through this. This is a gorgeous slide made by my colleague Mark Van Meersel, who is a professor at the University of Georgia. Shu Young Jen, by the way, got her PhD with Mark working on this stuff, and then she came to my lab as a postdoc, and now she's a professor. This is out of Molecular Cell Biology 6th edition. It happens to a photon, and this is a wonderful little animation. Here comes.
So I just want to say this is the full science on how the photons react in the energy centers and activate the chlorophyll 680 range here and chlorophyll over here. So it excites the molecule and then it jumps over, but he'll explain the true science of this
Comes
here.
a photon, boom, it hits, it's absorbed. It's a reaction center, this right here, electron. Boom, that excites the electron, moves up to a higher excitation level, then more photons come, hits the absorption site over here, and that then moves that electron, boom, all the way up to there, all the way from the sun to here, to here, to here, to here, out. That's called the light reactions of photosynthesis, and those reactions make adenosine triphosphate and NADPH.
And so those are essentially energy for the plant that can turn into sugars, feeds it back to exudates in the root zone, which feeds the microbes. The microbes break down the nutrients, feed that back to the plant. So the plant is reacting with the soil through photosynthesis. It's not just growing, but it's actually creating energy and then sugars and then giving that to the microbes and then feeding it back up. So it's constantly in a cycle back and forth. And this is just basic photons from the sun and the energy centers.
That's the light reactions of photosynthesis. And if you can answer that on a test, you're ready to graduate. This is a detailed light reactions. Now, that is a lot of biochemistry in a different diagram. And you can be the...
Now he's really proud of this one. He made this one himself. So you'll see Bruce Bugbee. He's at Utah State University, I believe, but he's done a lot of light research and he's worked with NASA. He also makes apogee instruments here. Apogee is what we use to measure the PPFD, which I'll get into in just a little bit, which is how much photon energy is actually hitting the different spots in the canopy. So,
judge of which one's more easier to understand. We know Albert Einstein and the Stark-Einstein law, one photon excites one electron. That's what Mark's diagram just showed us. But now I've got workers on towers more than the biochemistry of this. Here's the sun, right? So we're going to show the sun here, same as the other one. The sun is always smiling. Photons come in. Boom! This guy hits this platform with the hammer. The electron goes up here. Another worker catches it. Note that there's male workers here and female workers. I'm doing the skilled positions at the top. They put it in here. It turns a mill and it makes ATP, the energy for photosynthesis. Another photon comes in. This one's coming in this way. Boom! Sends it up here. Another worker puts it in a bucket and we get NADPH. This is called photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. We knew what 1 first, that's why they're backwards. 2 happens before 1. But
2 happens before 1, 2 makes ATP, photosystem 1 makes NADPH.
It takes photons from both sides to do this, to fully excite all the electrons for photosynthesis. Now, we have known for over 50 years that this worker right here can be excited with far red photons.
So that is the reason that we're shifting into ePAR in the industry, instead of just calling it PAR, the extended PAR range. Again, like you said, we've known for years that it does excite that. And it's just a matter of creating a system in order to measure that properly. So, and it goes a little bit further than 750. The instruments, read up to 760, but they're currently stating 750 nanometers.
Of 700 nanometers.
And that's Bruce Bugbee. Thank you, Bruce. Do you guys have any questions on that part? Again, if you can answer that, you can pass the test, according to Bugbee. So what is photosynthetic? Photosynthetic photon flux density, or PPFD. A lot of people, they ask for PAR maps or something like that in order to measure the light, and those maps are called PPFD charts, which I'll get into next. But that is the amount of light that arrives at a distance. So a good mnemonic saying to remember this is PPF plus distance, but the D actually stands for density. So it's photosynthetic photon flux density, and it's quite the mouthful to say. So we just say PPFD, but that's going to be when your light starts out, right? You turn it on, you have your emission source. At the emission source is your PPF, and then as it goes any distance past that, that's going to be your PPFD. So it's your photon flux at a distance, and then over time, or over a distance, you get different chart readings, and then depending on your light and how well it's made, and the evenness in the light and the distribution, so how far your bars are or how close they are together, you have hot spots or drop off. So with an HPS light, you have one giant emission source, where with LEDs, you micronize that source down into a bunch of tiny little points and then spread that out evenly. So the plant and the canopy receives that light a lot more evenly. People also call this a grow light distance chart. So if you guys are looking for lights and different emissions and where your plant should be, you're going to want to type in PPFD chart generally to find those things. If you go on our website, you'll see like underneath our lights, this is all listed at what distance, or you can click this link later. So this is the inverse square law. This is actually how it changes at a distance from the initial emission source. So you have your emission source here, and then a distance, another distance, and another distance. So when we measure our lights, we measure multiple distances, so that way we can give to our customers, here's what it'll be at this distance, here's what it'll be at double that distance. And what happens with the inverse square law is its intensity equals 1 divided by distance squared. So if this starts at 1 right here, it goes to 1/4, and that goes to 1/9, and etc. So mathematically, you can actually calculate out what your distance would be. But typically, you're looking for, okay, I want 1,000 PPFD for my plant at this life stage. Say it's like a couple weeks into flower, you want 1,000 PPFD. So you look at the PAR map and say, or look at the PPFD chart, and you say, okay, I need to hang it 12 inches away from the plant canopy, and then adjust it as I'm going through and growing. Or you can adjust the intensity based on how much power you're putting into it. So at 50% power or at 80% power, the amount of photons coming out is going to change.
That'd be useful if you had like a height. You're like growing indoors, and you only have would this control the height of your plant?
Yeah, it will. Sometimes cannabis, for example, will stretch to try to reach that light if it's not getting enough, and you kind of get a legginess to it, especially with HPS lights where you have to hang it 4 feet away just because you don't want the heat intensity to burn the plant. With our lights, we've tested them where you can actually grow the plants all the way up into the light itself, so it doesn't. Right, and then the profile of the actual light is only about 4 inches. I think it's a little less than that actually. So when you're considering, okay, I'm going to put it in a tent and I'm going to hang the light right here, versus an HPS light in a tent plus the 4 feet of canopy where you can't really go past that canopy height. And Danny will get into canopy, what'd you call it, canopy?
Canopy clearance.
Canopy clearance, yeah, she'll get into canopy clearance with commercial grows. So I originally started with HPS lights, testing that and the heat that they put off and having to move that air around all the time, replace those bulbs, how hot they get, taking a laser temp gun to them and having it say error because it's producing more heat than that laser temp gun can actually measure. This is where you save a lot of money, you save a lot of time when you're growing with LED lights. So you're not having to make these adjustments as much. You get a lot more space. You can get bigger plants out of it.
So where can you get that chart?
Our charts are on our website, right underneath the lights. And then our QR code, it's on the banners that are inside the grow stores. It's on our Instagram as well, under our link tree. And then I've got it at the beginning of this presentation, at the end of the presentation. You can just scan that QR code, and it'll take you to all of our stuff, our Instagram, our Facebook, our Twitter, and then our lead talks as well. So some blogs that we've done and put together explaining the 10 cardinal parameters of botany, PAR spectrum, PPFD. So all of this information is actually in a blog on our website as well. Lighting design. Stan, you want to join?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the fixturing, I mentioned to Tom, Dazor, we've been in business lighting manufacturing since the late 1930s, and the fixtures. It's super important in the design of the fixture, especially with LEDs, because while they don't emit heat forward, that's why you can have the plants grow up into it. They do emit heat because there's a power source going through it, and that heat is dissipated back through the extrusion. So internally, we actually have surface mount equipment, so we get the reels of LEDs and we populate those LEDs onto boards, but we use aluminum boards. So you have a heat dissipation into the aluminum boards, and then those aluminum boards are fastened directly. They're just not slid through like a slot or a groove. And we actually fasten them down, so they're screwed down onto the extrusion. So you really get a maximum thermal dissipation, which is important, for the whole life of the LED. Because even though LEDs, are rated to last a really long time, they can and do fail or dim quickly or lose intensity, or in this case they lose the PAR condition if they're not running at the correct. It's a thermal junction is what they measure in the spec. So the way that the fixture is designed and heat is managed, is crucial to all of that. And the metal components that house the actual drivers, the end plates, all of those are a heavy gauge steel, so there's no plastic in it, which again contributes to the thermal dissipation of the heat that's emitted through the back of the LEDs. And you'll see through the fixtures, and that's why we got that one up there for you to. I mean, it's sturdy, so that fixture is designed to last. So.
Yeah, so I think heat management is a big thing to discuss when building an LED, when deciding what to buy for LEDs. I mean, it looks like, okay, there's just 4 bars, I get it, plug it in, it works, but what we do on the back end as far as figuring all these things out, making sure that heat and thermal management is calculated. We have what I call our in-house scientists that kind of measure these things, and then electrical engineers that we go through, and every little detail of this light is designed for the end user. We want the best product to be created. We want the most flavor and density to come out of that, but we really want this product to last for you guys. So the extrusions here, which you can see on this light right there, the extrusions are aluminum, and then it's also a wet location rated light, so you can actually clean these off by spraying them down with soap and water, not worry about the light dying on you. So the test that we did for that was a 3-hour shower head test. So the light actually ran for 3 hours with the shower head over the top of it. And the plugs themselves are also wet location rated. So we have a 120 volt cord here. We also customize 240s, 277s, and then we also have conversion plugs where you can start with 120, but then say a year later you have an electrician come in, switch things out. You can pop a conversion plug onto that, and the universal driver inside of the light's going to pick that up, and it's going to half the amperage on it, so you can fit more lights on a single circuit.
Does LED draw more power than other sources?
Much
I know
less.
they'll put out heat, but energy consumption.
Yeah, so when you consider HPS lights, they're about 1,000. You take most of those and probably kick them up turbo on the ballast to 1150. So that's drawing 1,150 watts. This light here, the PARMAX 8, is a 650 watt. It actually runs about 642, but we want to make sure that if people are calculating the energy that they know the maximum initial draw on that light. So once it heats up, it actually runs a little bit more efficiently. And the drivers are housed in the center of the light right here. So there's 2 drivers on this light and 1 driver in this light. Now there's also VPD, which is vapor pressure deficit. And that is essentially monitoring your humidity and your temperature and keeping it in the right zone for growth. So if your humidity goes up and your temperature goes up, your VPD, you want it to be in the Goldilocks zone of that. That information's on our website as well. You guys can read those articles and kind of jump around the internet and see some VPD charts. So the VPD is regulated because the driver is in the center of the light and it's built with metal. It's not built with plastic. So when that light turns on and it heats up, it's going to actually cool down slowly when it turns off as well, which keeps the whole grow in a consistent temperature, and it doesn't shock the plant, which helps with pathogens or powdery mildew and things like that.
And the only other thing that I'll jump in is regarding the actual LEDs themselves. And you talked about it a little bit before and had the charts up, and lumens are for humans, and the PAR is for plants. We make a lot of lighting fixtures with LEDs that go into commercial and industrial applications where people need to see what they're doing. So we use Samsung LEDs. We use all different types of LEDs depending on the application. And what Aaron had mentioned before, I just want to emphasize, in particular the spectral output, of these LEDs. So the LEDs that we're using are Philips Lumens LEDs, and they are designed specifically for the horticultural application. So they're not designed for human vision. So, those LEDs, they're probably from a cost standpoint about 3 times the cost of a standard white LED. So that's why a lot of people go with the visible white LEDs, just because they're less expensive, and then they supplement that spectrum with the far red LEDs, which you had a graph up there that showed it's more of a spiky spectrum, just a narrow bandwidth of that LED. But the way that the Philips Lumens LEDs are designed, they have that broad band spectrum within the red that's most beneficial to the plants. So you can do all the heat management and so forth, and make a quality fixture, but the LEDs that are in there are going to produce the best results from the plant's standpoint. And we've gotten a lot of feedback from growers who've grown side by side with well-known brand LED fixtures, but in comparison to the results that they're getting out of these with these LEDs, maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, we're seeing the growers are getting a lot more density out of it. They're getting a larger yield, and then just making sure that it's the correct diode for that purpose. Like Stan was saying, there's a lot of certain types of diodes, specifically in the industry, a lot of Samsung diodes are being used, which were made initially for human. There's been some upgrades on those diodes, but there's still a lot of green light. So how much power are we putting into that fixture? And then what is the color band of that photon that's actually coming out, right? And how does that react with the plant? So we do spend a lot more money to make sure that the grower is getting the best quality and the highest premium diodes. And diodes are also binned. And binning means that some diodes fall in the lower bins and some fall in the higher bins. So making sure that we get the highest quality of those diodes and then put them into the fixture. And then we triple check everything before it goes out the door. So we place the actual diodes on the board on the surface mount technology machine, aka the SMT. We test it at the end of the machine. We test it when we depanelize those boards. Then we put them into the fixture themselves and then test the whole thing before it goes out the door. So we want to make sure that every light works and it continues to work for not only our 5-year warranty, but maybe 7 or 10 years down the line, people are still able to use these lights and get good quality out of them. So the PAR spectrum is really big. The red band spectrum and using the Emerson effect is huge, especially with growing cannabis. With leafy stuff like lettuce, a little bit more blue light is okay. But what we're looking to mainly produce is really high quality food and really high quality cannabis by choosing that spectrum there. So again, sturdy construction, built for longevity and precision. It's designed to last, the 5-year warranty. Wet location rated. Bam! Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Bugbee. So 3-hour shower head tested. All the lights are UL listed as well. So when we're going into commercial facilities for energy rebates, that's a big thing. And then making sure that a light isn't going to burn your house down, that it's been tested and properly tested is also really big in the industry. Making sure that it's a sturdy design. If the thing needs to get moved and or gets dropped, that it's fine. You'll notice that these are really strong lights, and that's our whole goal, is to be American made and to build the best, and to build the best here in St. Louis. So premium top bin horticultural diodes gives it a superior PAR spectrum, and it maximizes photosynthesis. So in flower, you guys know flowering times. Typically we're at 8 weeks of flowering time with the indica, or up to 12 weeks of flowering time with the sativa. You only have so much time that light turns on for 12 hours a day, and that it's able to photosynthesize and stack and build up and stack and build up, right? If we lose a day, we don't get that back. So making sure that we're maximizing that photosynthesis during that 8-week period is what's giving our customers better nugs, better bud, things that they're really happy to show off. So, and happy plants means less work for you guys. Unhappy plants means a lot more pathogens, a lot more chasing our tail. Looking at it, going, what else can I do? What other nutrient can I feed it? Is it the CO2? What adjustments can I make? But when you start with a good light, all of that stuff falls in line after that. And you start to go, okay, these nutrients are working properly. So start with a good light and make sure that it's designed really well and that it's designed with you guys in mind. I think it's a big thing. So what are the best grow lights for indoor plants, Danny? So LED grow lights that maximize photosynthesis efficiently. They use less energy, like you said, so 650 watts versus 1,150 watts. Our lights can be paid off. I think it's coming up probably. It keeps segueing to the next slide, but our lights can be paid off in 1.5 years in Missouri with electrical costs alone. So when you buy a light, if you were to compare that to the HPS that you would be running, that light pays for itself in 1.5 years, 1.51 years. The average kilowatt cent per hour in residential for Missouri is 11 cent kilowatt an hour. In California, that number is much higher, and these lights are paying for themselves in California in 1.1 years. So in a year's time, the customers are getting better quality product. They're able to build a brand around their better quality product, and then they're paying off their initial investment, and then down the line they can use that money for more resources, for better fans, for improved infrastructure, and things that are going to keep their business alive. So let's see, temperature regulation, VPD conscious, I think is very big. Some of these are made with plastic. You just take into consideration what you're buying and if it's going to continue to pay off in the long haul, and if you're getting the highest quality over that time. Because when we make these investments, we expect this to pay off for 5 years for you guys, So if you're getting a little bit better each run and you're doing 2 to 3 runs a year, you're looking at improved quality 15 times over. And then targeted PAR spectrum, more red, less green, but enough green. You need a tiny little bit of green. And wet location rated, again, UL listed. So do you guys have any questions on the first part of the basics here of lighting? Okay. So we all want to know one question, right? How do we maximize our yield? When we switch to an HPS light or when we switch to an LED light, how do we get the most out of that, and where does it become efficient for our investment? Is it efficient to run CO2, and how much CO2 do we run? So this is a daily light integral, and then right here we have the 18-hour photo period and the 12-hour photo period. So this is your vegetative cycle up to here. So most of you guys have grown before. You take a clone, and a clone only needs a tiny bit of light. It doesn't need a lot of light. And then that clone roots out, and you get it started and get going. You up-pot that clone into your vegetative cycle, which is going to be 18 to 24 hours of light. Again, this is just covering the basics. And as it's vegetating, you increase the light intensity. So we're giving it more light, more light, more light, more light. And then what happens here at this switch is it goes from 18 hours to 12 hours. And so this is how much light per day it's getting. It could still be the same intensity at that time or similar intensity, but it's getting less 24-hour period of light. So you get a drop off, and cannabis is a photoperiod plant. So what happens is when we give it more darkness, it initiates the hormones to switch over and realize that it's going into the later part of summer and going into fall, and then it begins to create its fruit, its flower, and used to be seed. So sensimilia means without seed, which is where that term comes from, but it begins to create its seed and fall and drop back to the ground, and so it can restart its cycle for the next year. As we're going through the blooming cycle, there's an increase in light and a little peak right here. So you can increase your intensity. And essentially what you're doing when you're growing is you're also doing this with nutrients. You're also doing this with CO2. You're bringing it all up together and bit by bit. So you'll notice that on bottles, it'll say to increase from 2 mils to 5 mils over the period of the plant. And you just want to increase the light and then increase the food source with that so they can photosynthesize faster. The bigger the plant, generally the more light that it can take, and the bigger the root zone as well. If you only have 1 or 2 roots, the top of the plant, as above, so below, it's going to burn up and not be able to take those nutrients. So this is how we get daily light integral, or DLI. There's this calculation here. Does anybody know how many seconds are in an hour?
3,600.
3,600, nailed it. Thank you, Stan. Bam. When we multiply 1,000 U-moles of PPFD, so if our PPFD chart says 1,000, we multiply that by the seconds in an hour. Essentially, the zeros cancel out, and that gives us 3.6 micromoles per squared, or micromoles squared per hour. But then we want to use that calculation over an 18-hour period or a 12-hour period. And this allows us to measure how much that plant is getting. So you can see the DLI here starts at about 10. At the end of vegetative stage, it's at about 45. So you can measure, okay, if my light's kicking out 1,000 PPFD at 12 hours per day, you do 3.6, so the 3,600 seconds in an hour gives us the micromole. 3.6 times 12 hours is 43.2. So that 43.2 range is going to fall right in here. And then at the end, it's going to touch into that again, about that 40 DLI per day. So at 1200 ppfd, which is typically about the most that cannabis can take, some studies show about 1300 and some studies show about 1200. It kind of plateaus on how much and how fast it can photosynthesize. On the other hand, lettuce only needs about 300 ppfd, so not a lot. Tomatoes and cannabis are very similar. That's why in the past we've referred to growing our tomatoes, because they're taking similar nutrients in the vegetative and the flowering. They run under similar life cycles and they can both take a lot of light. So at 1200 ppfd we get a DLI of 51.84, and you'll notice that 51.84 is at the top of this chart here. So it's kind of overdoing it a little bit. But with our PPFD, that's our photons. If we're supplying too many photons and too intense of photons, that the plant isn't able to photosynthesize properly, that's where light burn happens and that's where light bleaching happens. So again, we've tested our lights where we've had growers run they actually wanted to do it to kind of put it through the ringer, where they actually grew up all the way into the light and to see if it would cause any light bleaching or light burn, and it didn't. So making sure that we're matching the PAR spectrum and the amount of photons together to make sure that you guys get the best quality out of that. Do you guys have any questions on DLI? It's just a fancier way to calculate it.
Well, and so one thing is, for home growers, how do they know, like, what, how do they know what PPFD is hitting the plant, at a particular time during the growth cycle?
That would be the emission source and then the distance. So if it's 6 inches away and it's reaching 1000 ppfd at 6 inches or 12 inches away.
And I bring that up because, for our fixtures, we have a chart that shows, the intensity setting. So the fixtures themselves are dimmable, and we have a chart that shows, if you turn the fixture to this intensity at this distance, that's how much PPFD that you're getting. And so it correlates between that chart that you had, the DLI chart, and the intensity setting on the fixture based on the time that the plant is in its cycle. So we can supply that chart to help, a grower know, okay, in week 7 or week 10, here's where I should be on that DLI chart. What should I be on the intensity setting given the distance that the fixture's hanging from the plant? So
I think what Stan is getting at is that we've done those calculations in-house. So we do have a document that shows 60%, 70% output and at what distance the PPFD is. So you guys don't actually have to go and measure
You would
it.
have a chart that's detailed towards your light, and you would say at week 1, you'd have to figure out what distance that you're doing in the reg, but you would tell us what setting that we would need to have it on.
Right.
It's not like we gotta get out a slide rule and call a friend over and, hey, dude.
Nope. And then
Okay.
apogee meters, they're about 550 bucks a piece, so we've done all those measurements for you guys. We have an Excel file that says, okay, here's 60%, here's your
It's just hard
PPFD.
to print out, put it up on the wall.
Yep.
And say, okay, turn them down. Okay. It's gotta be pretty much idiot proof, or I'm just gonna mess it up.
Yeah, there's,
And then-
there's a lot of science and detail behind it, obviously, but it does come down to, okay, well, how do I actually do that? Right.
We've also supplied this information as well. So at the top of our website here, you can see LED talk or LED talk. You can see the chart is here also. So there's a lot more information in here as far as carbon dioxide levels and PPFD, but we'll get into some of those highlights right here. So how much does the plant need? Thank you for the segue again. Clones, seeds, and propagules are typically less than 100 ppfd, right? So it's just a little bit of light. If you think about a hurricane coming through and whipping up a bunch of hemp plants and cutting off branches, and those branches fly everywhere in nature, and they land in some creek or some pond underneath some leaves, and they're just touching a little bit of water. This is how nature has worked so that it can root itself out again, and it can grow up from and spread over time, you know, just reacting with nature. So those leaves and those cuts essentially in nature would be ripped off the plant, thrown into tiny small places where there's not a lot of light, there's a ton of shade, and then able to root out of that and then start to grow with the season. So small vegetative plants, typically 150 to 450 ppfd. This is also going to depend on your genetics, the way that you grow the plant, your environment. So this is a general understanding of, you know, what's safe for the plant. It's also going to change with the PAR spectrum. If you're using an HPS light, you might have to supply a lot more PPFD because it's not photosynthesizing at its peak performance. But if you are supplying a really good PAR spectrum, you can slowly increase that and allow the plant to photosynthesize faster and get faster growth. So here's where we reach large flowering plants. And again, you guys can get copies of this. It's posted online. Our QR code takes you right there, and then this actual presentation is posted up online as well. But 1250 ppfd, according to Bruce Bugbee, is right about where cannabis tops out. I believe that genetically it's a very fast adapting plant, and that some plants are going to be happier at 1150 and some plants are going to be happier at 1300 ppfd. But to say that 1200 is a good general range for most LED lighting is a safe way to do it. Now we're noticing that with our lights, with less light, that the plants are actually competing better. So you're using less energy to photosynthesize faster. So at about 1050, 1050 ppfd, our lights are outcompeting other lights at 1300 ppfd, which means more electricity in, means higher cost to the grower. So really making sure that that PAR spectrum is on point is very important.
So all of that depends on the height of the light too, right?
Yeah, your canopy clearance. So if your plants are here and your light's here, you know, your plant's going to grow up towards that.
Right.
So as it's growing towards that, it's actually increasing the amount of light. So if you set it right at the
light, continuously raise your lights.
But as the plant's getting bigger, it's going to be able to take more light. So typically you have a sweet spot. So with our light, you know, you can hang it here and then it's going to grow up and finish right about there. Now you don't have to keep that 4 feet away, so you get to maximize the amount of space in your tent, and vertically you get to maximize how big you can grow the plant.
We don't have a tent, but it would still apply, right?
Yeah, tents or grow rooms. You know, a lot of people grow in basements or things like that where the ceiling height, you know, you have to crouch down to get in there, and you don't want to finish a plant that's only this big. You really want to spend the time to vegetate it, blow it up real big, and then get as much out of it as you can in the time that you spent growing that plant.
So this, what you're saying is plant touching the light is not a big issue anymore with these?
With our light.
I got the T5 lighting right now. The plant gets up very close to it, it just burns it.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of the heat typically that's produced off of that. With our extrusions, it's pulling that heat away from that diode, and there's also a cover on the light that's protecting it as well and dissipating that a little bit. So it's in that, the heat stays in that chamber.
It gives me instantly more grow room. I'm liking. So I'm thinking from the T5, if you got it above it, you replace it with an LED, it just gives me like a foot or two more grow room.
Yeah.
Just let it go.
Well, what a lot of people did is they went from 1,000-watt metal halides and 1,000-watt HPSs that were being used because that was the one they came up with. They went to T5s, the same as every other aspect of commercial lighting did. They went from those high-intensity light sources to the fluorescent light source because that was the first step in energy efficiency. Well, we've graduated beyond the T5s, and now they're all upgrading to the LED because the efficiency is there, and you're also causing less risk to the plant at the same time. So it's, if you've gone from HPS to LED, you can jump 2 phases. You played hopscotch as far as where you're at in the lighting game. But if you're going with T5 and you make that
I
jump,
started with T5.
and that's fine.
I didn't know.
T5s are,
The T5 is much better than HPS for the metal halides because you're looking at efficiency, but you're also from a cost standpoint, I mean, I'm sure budget will have something to play in it as well. You know, oh, I can replace the lamp, but at the same time, what if you accidentally bump that lamp and your glass breaks? Then you've got, all your plants are contaminated at that point, and you're not going to want to do anything with something that's got glass in it somewhere.
yeah, and you got, you know, different gases that are in certain bulbs. I've had HPS bulbs explode on me before. Peak summertime, they get too hot. And you walk in your grow room and you're like, huh, one of my lights is out, and instantly it clicks. Uh-oh, I've got glass all over the floor, all over my plants. And if you're in that room, you know, that gas isn't usually safe to be around. But compact fluorescents, I think they run at like 54 watts a piece, somewhere in there. They work great for clones. If you're starting in a hydro situation, you got a T5 light way up above them, they're giving that 50 to 100 PPFD range. So you can take your LED light and tune it all the way down, you know, kick it down to 10% and use just a little bit of energy and do that same thing properly. But you can continue to use your compact fluorescent lights for your little babies. But if you're in a commercial situation where you really need to turn things out properly, the LED technology provides a better spectrum. So the compact fluorescent, if you look at a graph of it, it's just tiny little peaks and valleys. So you're not really hitting the proper parts of the chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and what the plant needs to keep going. So when we take cuts off a mother plant, that mother plant is used to a certain spectrum. The more that we can keep that spectrum the same, so that we take a cut and it doesn't shock the plant, and we keep that same spectrum all the way through and just reduce the intensity on that clone, the happier the plant's going to be, the better it's going to jump back into that next cycle. So.
One of the points that I'll throw up there, just from testing that we've done in our lab with the HPS lights, you had mentioned.
Speak up a little.
You had mentioned, you know, because of the heat, they've got to be a minimum of 4 feet away from the plant, or else they burn the plant.
Yeah.
Well, when we've done the PPFD testing on, you know, 1,000-watt HPS lights, and tying that into this, what you have right here, what the large flowering plants require in terms of PPFD, the HPS lights at distance don't achieve these upper echelons of PPFD. So you might be 4 feet, 4.5 feet from the plant. If you put a meter under it and check the PPFD, it doesn't hit those upper ranges.
Right.
Plants still grow under it, you still get, but if it's really about maximizing plant, you know, bud density and all of those things, you're not going to get it to the extent that you can with LEDs.
Right, so being able to hit those higher numbers, being able to maximize the amount of space that you're growing in, and being consistent with your plant is what's going to make that density. I remember when I, you know, first got going, first couple of years of growing, I just kept looking at it going, okay, why is it larvae is what it's called, right? It's like an airy bud. There's no density to it.
I'm a pro at those.
Yeah, we all are to begin with, you know. So I'm playing with nutrients and playing with organics and trying to figure out, okay, if I brew fish tea over bat guano tea, I'm pulling the nitrates from both, but is the fish working better than the bat? Like, spending a lot of time figuring out nutrients when it all starts with the light. And so then I got, you know, 3 HPS lights in the space that I could fit 1 large LED just to try to get more light crossing over, but then I'm getting more heat. My electricity bill's through the roof, you know, so it's kind of a battle that you can just start out right by going with a really good LED light to begin with. And then start to play with your nutrients, and then you can start to play with the amount of water.
You're more effective with your nutrients the way you can.
Very much so. You're going to use less money. If you're not getting enough light and you think you want to increase the density, so then you start to look into how calcium is the building block of some of that density in the plant. And then you increase the calcium, but then you have a lockout in the root zone because your levels of your calcium are up here, where your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are here. The plant's going to lock itself out, and then it just ruins that whole grow, right? So you're balancing those nutrients, but with a optimum photosynthesis, you're going to be using those nutrients at a better level, and so you're going to be saving money. Instead of dumping extra money into calcium and trying to figure it out, you're going to be able to use the exacting ratios of what's recommended. Do you grow with bottles or like nutrients or super soil?
I tell you, I can show you my wall of nutrients. I'll try it.
Okay. Yeah.
I've got it. But yeah, I did lately. I've been using the bloom stuff, the Flora, whatever.
Floraflex?
I just put it in dirt, 5-gallon bucket, and I ain't trying to look to win no contest. That's when I get.
You'd be happy doing that same thing with a really good light source too. And
I've tried everything else, but other than the CO2, which I haven't really messed with, but the light source is my common denominator of all my grows. And it's I've tried every kind of, well, try this will get your buds in.
Well, you can kind of get to that point though in the future. It's just starting with that good light and then taking that and going, okay, well, maybe if I do add a little bit more calcium and magnesium throughout that growing cycle to kind of raise those ratios, bring up the phosphorus to kind of increase that density as well, and pairing those together, and then looking at your specific genetics. So if you have a mother plant that you're running for, I ran lavender for 7 generations, and I was playing with a lot of those things, knowing that these genetics are exactly the same. They came from exact copies of the plant. But in this grow, I'm going to boost that calcium to magnesium ratio from 3:1 to 5:1 and try to bring that up as I'm bringing up the phosphorus. So then you can really start to play with those things, which gets into that competitive, fun growing, competition growing. So
Not there yet.
we'll get you there. So CO2, carbon dioxide. On our website, we kind of explain atmospheric carbon dioxide and how that's increased over time. Currently, the ambient carbon dioxide outside is about 412.5 ppms, and that's increasing about 2 to 2.5 ppms per year, which is a lot outside. So when we're in our grow room, we want a sealed environment where the plant's able to capture that CO2. So we're not just pumping it out, but we're giving it the right amount of CO2 that's going to be used for photosynthesis and captured inside. 95% of plants are C3 plants, 5% of plants are C4 plants. An increase in CO2 and atmospheric CO2 is okay for the 95% of plants out there that are C3 plants. Cannabis is a C3 plant.
Do they make something to check those levels?
Yeah, they're called CO2 sniffers.
Well, I figured they were, but I mean, do they make it affordable?
Yeah, definitely. There's different types of controllers that can measure that, sensors that can measure that, small CO2 monitors that can measure that. So there's all sorts of ways that you can invest in that to get those measurements.
Where would you find such a thing?
Your local grow store.
Oh, really?
They're going to be a great resource.
Do you have those?
I've got the Spartan.
Okay.
Yeah, so Spartan is a controlling system with an attachment sensor to it that's going to measure and then it's going to display typically. So that's a professional way to go about it, where you can monitor and then attach it to a tank where it's releasing. Now another way to get CO2 is to grow mushrooms, so oyster mushrooms, or you could grow shiitake or lion's mane, but mushrooms breathe like we do, like humans. They inhale oxygen and they exhale CO2, and plants do the opposite, where they're breathing in CO2 and they're exhaling oxygen. So growing your own mushrooms out of mushroom grow bags, I think they've got some mushroom grow bags over here for CO2. It's a good way that if you're going to the store and constantly buying oyster mushrooms, that you can just grow your own in your grow and then cut those off, take them back, and cook up a good breakfast or something. So again, CO2 levels are similar to PPFD levels. And then there's fun mushrooms like lion's mane that's really good for your
No, I don't
brain.
care about the mushrooms. I hate mushrooms. The CO2 is interesting. I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, so CO2 is where we also get the density from. So it's not just the phosphorus and calcium and the ratios and the magnesium that's going to bring up that chlorophyll. It's CO2 that's going to really bring that density because it's going to allow the plant to continue to photosynthesize properly. So in that 8-week cycle, if you're only photosynthesizing so much up to week 6 versus boosting your CO2 and building that density over that time, that's what's going to really harden it up and bring that all together with a good light source. Now, if you're running compact fluorescents, nothing against that, except for really don't ever run them for flower. It's not really going to do anything for you. You're going to be spending a lot of time, a lot of electricity, and then going, you know, it's all right. But when you see the true results of, oh my gosh, this plant tastes like a field of berries, you know, when you see the density where you're spending the time and your nutrients, your soil, your own time in and out of the grow, it might be fun, but it's really fun to get something that just makes you smile when you pop a jar open and go, wow, that really has everything I need in it. So CO2 levels over 3,000 ppm, do not do that. Can be toxic to humans and animals. That's why you want to measure your CO2 and have it released on a system like a Spartan controller. So about 900 to 1,200 ppm for large flowering plants is the range that you want to be in. Finishing there, some growers will leave, you know, their flower room at 1,000 or 1,100 ppm, which is, you know, connected in their veg room, which is connected into the clone room, and kind of cycle that all together there. With your clones, you need a lot less CO2 because your root zone isn't there, your plant mass isn't there, so it's not able to capture that light and turn that into energy. So the bigger the plant, the more CO2 you're going to need. If you're running separate rooms, typically your flower room is twice the size of your vegetative room, so you might need 2 tanks for a giant flower room versus 1 tank in your veg room. And then mushrooms, if you want to do that, typically, you know, with a 4x4 or a 5x5 tent, you can go with 1 bag, but I would recommend 2 mushroom grow bags. And CO2 is heavier than air, so it's going to fall to the ground. So emitting your CO2, typically you want to come out up top and then fall down. So if you're working with mushroom grow bags, you hang those up high and allow that CO2 to fall down on the plants and recirculate through. So here is the fun part, the scientific research. So Suman Chandra, I hope I'm saying that right, her and her team studied the photosynthetic response of cannabis sativa L. Cannabis sativa L is also indica and sativa. That's just the Latin name for it there with the L. To elevate CO2 levels, and published this article in 2011. Now this was studied with HPS lights at the time in 2011. We weren't quite at the technology that we are now in 2022. So they ran CO2 concentrations of 390, 545, and 700 ppm. And what they were measuring is the photosynthetic rate, transpirational loss. So transpiration is when water leaves the plant, the stomata and the leaf opens up, and the water comes out of the plant, comes up and out. So how much water are you losing through that leaf material and the stomatal conductance? Those two kind of go hand in hand. And intercellular CO2 concentration, so how much CO2 is inside of the actual plant itself. Now I concentrated on stomatal conductance, transpirational water loss, and water use efficiency. And you can see that, you know, these are big plants at this point that they're studying. They're flowering at the time. So they've already gone through their vegetative cycle. They're in flower. Now our ambient air, again, at this time is about 412 ppms outside. So 390 to 545 is a good range if you think about just putting a plant outside. If you seal it in a grow room and it consumes all that CO2, it's going to drop that level below ambient unless you're cycling fresh air in Typically, grow rooms aren't completely sealed, but the more we can seal them, the better off we are to this regulation. So there's a decrease in stomatal conductance of 16.5%, transpirational water loss of 26.75%, so it's saving 25% of that water being lost through the leaf. And then the water use efficiency, just by hitting that ambient, average range, goes up to 59.75% from increasing 390 to 545 ppms. Now here's what's really interesting. When we get to 700 ppm, so it's not hitting the 900 or 1200 level, it's just 545 to 700 ppm. So 155 ppm difference, that water use efficiency goes up 176.75%. So how much time we're spending going in and out of that grow and regulating our water. Or if we have an automatic drip system where maybe you're originally feeding or watering the plant once every 2 days, and then you bring up that efficiency, and then you're watering it once every day, but then you bring up that efficiency again, and you're able to water it maybe twice in a single day, little bits of water. And so this is increasing that photosynthesis as you're able to supply that food source, supply that water, and an increase in photosynthetic rate of 44% higher. So if you consider, I'm going to spend 6 months growing this plant all the way through clone, veg, flower, harvest. What happens when I get an extra 50% material back out of my investment, An extra 44% in just photosynthesis and density and then flavors that come through with the type of lighting that you're using. It really starts to pay off, and it really starts to pay off well to make it where we go, okay, is it something I should invest in? Should I really invest in CO2? But once you get the light and your carbon dioxide levels and then start to boost your nutrients, this is just carbon dioxide photosynthetic rate. So you're, potentially getting twice as much material out of your 6 months of growing. In which case it's going to help to your return on investment and for some of you guys to build a good brand. Any questions on that part? So yes, specifically maximizing our yield around a tuned atmosphere is important, and when CO2 concentrations become beneficial to invest in. LED grow lights have shown to produce a larger yield, increased photosynthetic rate. They use less wattage, again, so if you have to put 1.5 HPS lights in place of one LED light, you're not only looking at 1,150 watts, you're looking at 1,500 watts or 1,600 watts versus 650 watts. So the space that you can actually put, say, a 4x4 LED grow light, you can, and you have 1.5 HPSs for that same space, you're running 650 watts in that space versus 1,600 watts trying to get that same amount of light in that space. And then you get the heat reduction as well. So you're not having to pay for a lot of air conditioning costs, which can get pretty spendy, or large air conditioners. So CO2 definitely helps to increase your yield, definitely helps to make sure that your investment pays off. Any questions about CO2?
Yeah, a dumb one.
Yeah.
Is CO2 present in that room at all times? At just a certain, but we just don't know what level, or is there no CO2 in the room?
Yeah, let me show you this chart here. So, here's 800,000 years. Here we are. This tiny little dot here, right? So this is the Ice Age. We're going back to dinosaurs 800,000 years ago. This comes from climate.gov. These were CO2 levels. The highest previous concentration, roughly 300,000 years ago, hit 300 ppm. This is the Industrial Revolution. This is where we started manufacturing, burning fossil fuels, and going off the wall, having fun, just building stuff and increasing as humans. So over that amount of time, we're looking at 1750 here. You can see the early 1900s, 1930. This is where we've been driving trucks around. We've been transporting a lot of materials. We'd pump a lot of oil out of the ground, burn that off, and the CO2 levels are just incrementally increasing and just skyrocketing. I mean, if you look at this graph at 412.5 ppm, it's not coming back down. So yes, CO2 is in the ambient air, and it's also going to be increasing. I was talking about C3 and C4 plants. It works well for 95% of the plants, but increased CO2 levels are not good for 5% of plant species, which means we could literally lose 5% of all the plants that exist if these levels keep going too high.
But I think what my question really is I'm in a room, I'm in a grow room, got it sealed off, the whole 9 yards. Is there CO2 in that room?
Yeah, and then the plant's going to be...
We just don't know what level.
Right, and you can use the CO2 sniffer to determine that level.
We may have one. There's a little gadget on the wall that I don't pay much attention to. Check that out.
So, yeah, sensors and professional sensors that are going to monitor that, to the correct level, and then also can be tied into an output system that's going to pump it out at the right level and keep it. So if it starts to fall, it's going to release a little and release a little. In that sealed grow room, the plant's going to be eating that CO2 as food. So if it's sealed and you don't have that outside air coming back in, or you don't have a CO2 tank inside of there, then it's slowly going to drop, and that level's going to drop and drop and drop. So when you consider growing cannabis outdoors in huge fields of hemp, 10 acres, 1,000 acres, 100,000 acres of hemp, it takes a very long time for a hardwood tree to grow. I don't know if you guys have ever been to the redwood forest, or like out in California, the giant trees, been here since, way back when. They've been growing for a long time and absorbing that CO2, which is why we see, some of these spikes in these levels and then drops in these levels, because you'll have trees that are growing, and then there's a giant wildfire or something that drops those trees, and then those CO2 levels increase, and then the trees come up and they consume that CO2 and back and forth. So when you consider growing cannabis outside, it's going to help a ton with the ambient carbon dioxide and absorbing that. If you look at graphs on of our country in the United States of where large agricultural grows are, what happens in coming up into the summer is the CO2 decreases as those plants are growing, and then when those crops fall in the wintertime, the CO2 increases. So cannabis grows really quickly and it can absorb a lot of that CO2 versus 10,000 year tree. You can grow a 12-foot cannabis plant in a single season. So over time, that's going to help with carbon emissions and repairing our soil. So again, you get larger production and yield, more density to cannabis flowers, healthier plants, which means less pathogen and bug issues, increased photosynthetic rates, increased water use efficiency, decreased stomatal conductance, decreased transpirational water loss. So your plant's using it a lot more efficiently. It's not releasing it through the leaf, but it's actually using the water that it's given properly for photosynthesis. And the biggest thing here is more efficient use of labor and time. We don't want to spend all of our time in the grow room. We want to spend just the right amount of time, come in, talk to our plants, hang out with them. Or if we want to spend our time hanging out with our plants, maybe it's not labor that we're doing. Maybe we're just in there enjoying the plants for the time. So going through and kind of chasing your tail in a grow can kind of be a headache sometimes. So to remove a little bit of that headache, start with a good light source, take care of your CO2, adjust your nutrients and your airflow, and you're going to be really happy. And again, that is all laid out on our website under Lead Talk. The 10 cardinal parameters of botany go through that and kind of lay out how you can increase these things. So feel free to give that a read, or if you guys ever need to use that as a resource to refer back to. I spent a lot of time finding studies and citing those actual studies, so it's scientific research. It's not just what we call bro science, which is, you know, hey bud, I did this and it did that, but the actual true science of why this stuff works and how it works.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, anytime.
I promise. How do we know? I'm sure it depends on how many plants you have, how big your room is, what kind of light you have. How do you know how much CO2 to pump in that room? Don't get me wrong, we've been making beautiful plants, and they're awesome, but I want to be more than lucky.
Right.
You know, if this is something that's going to benefit and, you know, pretty much guarantee good yields, how do we figure that out? Is there a charge for that too?
Yeah, that's on the website. And
Okay,
then also
that's
right here, you can see small flowering plants are between 800 ppm and 1000 ppm. I kind of flew through this part right here, so I'll just go back over it.
So yeah, I just didn't absorb that.
And then large flowering plants at 900 ppm versus 1200 ppm. So CO2 tanks, typically you got to go to a grow store and get that tank refilled or swap it out. Now that's going to take a lot of time. So some growers keep their ppm at 800. Some growers keep their ppm at 1200. They would rather take the time or have the extra tanks to make sure that it's at a higher level. Some growers want to use less of that resource and try to get more out of it. So finding your sweet spot, finding what those genetics can take with that light source is kind of where the magic happens in growing. I would say between 800 and 1200 ppm is going to be your safe zone for creating really good stuff. Again, the faster that plant is photosynthesizing, the more it's going to eat up that CO2. So if you notice that, you know, your density, you do one run at 1100 ppm and your density is a lot better than when you ran it at 800 ppm, stick with what works for your genetics. So what are the important factors in botany to increasing photosynthesis? Danny? So number one is proper lighting, and Danny's going to come up here and talk about some stuff that she's seen out in the industry and the commercial grows. That, you know, sometimes growers are sticking with HPS lights, that it's working for them. Maybe they have a 12 or 15 foot ceiling and they're able to put that plant 4 feet away and pack in that lighting. Combining HPS with metal halide to try to get that right spectrum. But when you consider that you have to replace a bulb every 6 months to a year, and you're looking at 170 to 110 bucks a bulb. That cost alone in bulbs over 5 years, just in the bulb and replacing that bulb, and every 5 years is going to be the same cost as the light. So in electrical savings, you pay off the light in 1.5 years. With the bulb and replacing the bulb, you pay off the light in 5 years. So essentially, just by replacing HPS light, in 5 years, you could have bought 2 other lights and then had 3.5 years of electrical savings as well on top of that. So obviously, as we know now, an increased CO2 leads to increased yield and quality. Again, this is all in the 10 cardinal parameters of botany here. It's pretty long. It took me a while to put all this together, but it goes into nutrients, pH, sweet spots, overwatering, underwatering, soil temperature, what happens in nature, and regulating these temperatures. So regulation is really important. So regulating your airflow, regulating your temperature of your air is going to regulate the temperature of your soil. And then watering rates and watering schedules. So you'll see an increased efficiency through CO2, increases availability for uptake and regulation of turgor pressure inside of the plant cells. So that's when when you see something dehydrated and that plant just kind of falls over, it has no turgor pressure inside of it. When it's able to uptake that water and spread out and increase that pressure in the cell wall, it begins to kind of brighten up and stiffen up, and that's turgor pressure. So you'll see that the plants are what we call praying more, and they're kind of in this stage. My Instagram name is Praying Mantic, which is a play on words for plants being happy and praying, and then also praying mantises and working with bugs in nature. So less labor, less likely to overwater and underwater by using automated systems when you're using LED lights. In the 10 cardinal parameters of botany, I talk about microbes and the microbiome. It was previously known as the 9 cardinal parameters of botany because we were missing microbes, which is a huge part of growing. And a lot of that research started in the early 1990s and then up through 2002, and then again studies in about 2010, 2012 that really changed, the products that are on the grow store shelves and how we're growing and how we understand that those plants are photosynthesizing, creating sugars, feeding those sugars to the microbes, and the microbes are actually breaking down the nutrients and feeding it back to the plant. Now in synthetic cocoa growing, you're kind of pumping those nutrients in to the plant and trying to get to uptake really quickly versus organic growing. The issue with over-fertilization is that we get algae blooms that happen, a lot of runoff from trying to force feed the plant versus working with nature, which can cause toxicity and cause dogs to die that way, or other animals that go and swim in a lake that's covered in that green algae. So I think understanding nutrients and how plants solubilize those and how the microbes break those down is really important. So that'll also decrease pathogens by having a healthier microbiome on the plant. And it'll help with nutrient regulation. So understanding your genetic potential and the needs of individual species, I think, is also important when you're working with lights. Maybe you're growing tomatoes or peppers instead of cannabis, and you don't need to crank that light up to 100%. Maybe you're setting it at 60%. Using that light, or you can use a PPFD chart and go, okay, here's where most of my light's falling, but I've got this extra space in the tent, and the photons are spreading out, and I can use those lower levels to start to grow other things on the side of that. Humic and fulvic acid is used to chelate nutrients, essentially splices and binds the elements into a more bioavailable form. I did another talk here a few weeks ago on that. If you go onto our YouTube account, you can see that talk, which is about probiotics and microbes and how to break down organic nutrients. Oxygen is important for larger and healthier roots, so you don't want it sitting in a wet source, essentially cutting off the oxygen. You want that to flow a little bit, which is why there's ebb and flow systems where the water will pump in and then drain out and pump in and drain out. Excuse me. Root pruning is done by physically cutting or splitting roots. It's the same as topping a plant. If you guys have ever topped a plant and it splits, you can also do that with the root zone. You don't want to cut off the roots completely, but if you have a bunch of them hanging down from a hydro system and you put that into a soil system, you can chop off some of those ends and they'll actually split. Or you can use certain types of grow bags where the roots will reach the outside of the grow bag and oxygen will hit that root and it'll cause it to splice off and then increase in mass. So that's kind of the important factors for increasing your yield in botany. Any questions there? All right, Stan, how do you get your return on investment? It's all up there, you just got to read it.
I think you kind of went through that, the ROI, just especially with the energy savings, in comparison to the HPS systems, and then the cost to replace the bulbs and so forth. You just don't have to do that with the LED fixture.
So pop quiz, how long does it take in Missouri? compared to an HPS light, to pay off your light.
Year and
1.51 years.
5.1. Hey, yours, I figured
Hey,
it was
that
close enough.
.01 is important.
Yeah, for some growers, I mean, they really measure things out.
Yeah,
And
well, we're not some growers. We're like, did we make any?
you're becoming some growers. I mean, that's the beautiful part about growing, right? You start to see things differently. You start to see plants differently. You start to see nature differently, have a different understanding. And some growers are very neurotic about measuring every single little detail. So we try to do a lot of that groundwork for them. We make light work of it, if I may. But
Well, here's another
Oh,
one.
I caught that.
Here's another point as well, Tom.
Light, so light.
Tom, here's another point as well. When they're doing this analysis, they're looking at it from a commercial growing perspective.
do you want to jump up here, Danny?
Oh. So those guys are paying on average, Andrew, like 6 or 7 cents a kilowatt hour. If you go down to Anheuser-Busch, they're paying less than 3 cents a kilowatt hour. They've got a deal with Ameren. So if it's taking an average grower that's paying about 6 to 7 cents, and you're paying 11 cents at home, your return on investment is going to happen a lot faster, just by switching to LED from
Right.
fluorescent, metal halide, high pressure sodium, anything else like that. So I
think
haven't
that'd
gotten
be-
that far down, but it does say on here that, you know, it's shortened to 1.1 years
In
on
California.
average for California. Well, you have to look at their commercial rate is a similar rate as far as residential rate here is in St. Louis. We've got some of the cheapest power in the entire nation. If you go up to Massachusetts, they're paying almost the same rate as California. So,
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's what Danny specializes in. We'll go into commercial grows and to take these measurements, and Danny does layouts as well. So she travels around and helps these growers kind of understand, okay, there's commercial rates, there's residential rates, how many lights do I need to fit in, how many plants can I fit in that. This is something that both her and I specialize in, is helping our customers to increase their return on investment and then to build a really good company by making the right decisions to start out with. So increasing yield, this doesn't include HVAC costs. The electricity savings doesn't include HVAC cost. So you're also saving in your cooling. Your heat is going to be a lot more consistent. We're finding that the lights, you know, depending on your ambient air temperature, are keeping the grow right at about 75, 80 degrees, which is perfect for cannabis. So that's where you get the maximized photosynthetic rates, is about 75 to 85 degrees. And it means your air conditioner isn't going to be kicking on and off and on and off, which also will drop that electrical bill a ton and continue to be able to invest back in. So down here you'll see we're seeing growers building stronger brands, which means they're more able to take that money in their pocket and hire skilled workers. You know, really look for the proper people that are going to run the thing correctly and care about what they're doing, but they can also spend that money on designing and marketing strategies. Their packaging costs, where their stickers are coming from, their web branding. So increasing that ROI, you know, it returns back in a lot of other parts of the business that are going to keep that business flourishing and running happily. Tools as well, those are a big cost. So you have a lot of people in there with trimmers, and all of a sudden, you know, 10 scissors break in the middle of harvest, and you got to go buy another $500 in trimming scissors. So to have that extra $500 sitting in your pocket because you made that right initial investment, it's going to be huge on continuing to run that business. Less labor, healthier plants, happier people, happier plants, happier people, vice versa. So
Happy makes happy.
happy makes happy. Yes, indeed. So this is the PARMAX 4 here. It's a 4-bar. It's a 2x4 light. I think we talked to most of you guys about this. And then the 8-bar here. This is our staple light. It fits a 4x4 tent, but it also works on 5x5 tents with the mylar on the side and the side reflection. We have a lot of growers running 5x5 tents where they're seeing great results in running that, but the actual footprint of the light itself is 4 feet by 4 feet, so it'll fit a 4x4 tent perfectly. So depending on if you already have a 5x5 tent or if you're looking to buy a light and then buy your tent, we recommend a 4x4 or 5x5. 5x5 will just give you a little bit extra room around the sides. And then also these lights, they stack up against each other. So there's 2 ways that you can run these. If you have 2 lights, you could butt these ends up right against each other, so they're touching that way. Or you can, touching this way, or you can run the bars where you continue and put one light here and the next light next to it. So the distance in between the bars is 4.5 inches, which means if you want to place your next light next to it, you can place it 4.5 inches away and give a little bit of space, and then you have a whole ceiling of even, consistent lighting, which is really nice because with HPS lights you get hot spots in different areas, or you have to adjust one up to another because you have a different genetic that grows a lot taller, so you're making that adjustment. With this, you get a really consistent, even light canopy. Oh, there she is. Again, we have Bluetooth options and standard dimmable options. The Bluetooth option puts the controller into your hands. It allows you to set timing schedules and kind of remove that wall timer completely from the wall. Just plug the light in directly and then do everything through the application where you can set your timers, your timing schedule. You can switch from vegetative to flowering and set it up where you've got one at 18 hours and one at 12 hours. And then literally you go, okay, I'm ready to flower, click the button, and then it just switches the light schedule right over. There's also, in case there's a power outage, there's a safety setting where you can set it to revert to the last power settings. Out here in Missouri, we get a lot of storms and things that cause quick power outages, but it kicks right back on. So in the application, it'll actually register that. And it's a Bluetooth application, so you just have to be next to the light and then you can control it or set up long-term animations where, say, say you want to take a 2-week or 3-week vacation, but you want that light intensity to increase from 60% to 70% to 80%. You can set up animations where it will run 60% for 2 weeks, 70% for 2 weeks, or however long you want, and then 80%. You can go take that vacation, and even though you're not next to the light, it's going to remember it inside of there. So there's a device inside that's a receiver, and then it also has RAM inside of that to remember the memory of the settings. And, oh, hold on, try this one more time. Oh, and we're done.
Well, we're not done yet. I still have my piece of
Yeah.
to play.
So
So
let's
I
talk with
always
Luna.
want to preach canopy clearance, no matter what. It's one of those things, just because you can grow your plant right up to the bottom and through a fixture, don't do it. Just because you can't, just because I can do 100 miles down the highway probably means I probably shouldn't do it anyways. I'll probably get pulled over and get a ticket. It's just one of those things, because at that point when you pass a certain threshold of the light, LEDs are designed, they shoot down. Whereas the HPS of the older days, you've got a wide breadth as far as how it can reach and everything else like that. So at that point, this top of the plant that's going through is not getting the light that it's going to need. So it's just a waste. So I don't know if anybody's here about, like, I grew up with my grandfather, do not waste. So that's a big portion for me. Another thing, when you start looking at the old traditional systems, your HPS and metal halides, some people went one way or the other. Some people did mix match and like a checkerboard formation. You're looking at a 70% efficiency rate as far as how the light is hitting the canopy of the plant. So if you've got only 70% uniformity, that means 30% of your plant isn't going to be as productive as the other part of it, because that drop-off is hitting that point and your fixtures are spaced so far apart. T5, like I said, it was the next generation of trying to get energy efficient, but unfortunately most of your T5s that are on the market are going to be leaning more towards the blue side of things. You're not going to really get that range and need to actually flower something that's going to be purposeful for. If you do get some flowers by chance, you probably noticing it's not going to be the quality that you were going after. Yeah. So I would recommend that. Plus, in addition, you also risk if you do accidentally bump it while you're tending to your plant.
Done that, yep.
You have that risk of, getting that glass and those vapors everywhere in your system. So that's definitely, as far as the safety issue is concerned and a quality standpoint, you're not going to do that. When they went from the old metal halides to T5s, even in commercial space, when people started, making food and stuff like that underneath them, they required sleeves, so there was no risk if there was some kind of lamp failure that you have glass in your food. Everybody's seen how many recalls there have been out in the world right now because, there's glass in the food. Chances the reason why there's glass in the food is because there's probably a lamp that broke somewhere on the assembly line. But as far as, if
Also, as the grower, you have to reach up there and take that broken piece out, and that is...
potato.
But yeah, you can stick a potato on.
But even with like T5 lamps, you're not supposed to touch them when you change them out. And they have a light loss factor of 80% after a short amount of use. So you're still wanting to look at relamp an entire fixture every 6 months to a year, the same as you had with the high pressure sodium.
I'm using the same bulbs I bought 3 years ago.
So you're
Yeah, so
probably-
the output kind of just slowly
so
dims.
you're probably at about 50% of your life right now on them. So you're not even getting the light levels that you thought you were going to get at the beginning. So let's say at the beginning your first crop came out, you were in the veg station, you're like, yes! Well, it's 3 years later and you're like, why isn't my plant doing what it was doing when I first put these in? Because you have to relamp. At least with LED, you don't have to relamp. Most LEDs, you'll see charts that say, hey, these can go for 100,000 hours. I don't know about you and me, but 100,000 hours is a long time. But you've got about 8,600 hours a year if you've got something running 24/7. So that's why people start looking at that 10-year lifespan as far as a good measuring point for LED. But even LEDs set to degrade over time. And a lot of points, I usually like to say that after 10 years, you're probably looking at a 10% decline, which is still less than you had with your T5, which is dramatically less than what you had with your HPS and your metal halide back in the day. Because those, you're at like 64% after 5,000 hours of use. And you're not going to grow anything substantial underneath something if it's already lost 50% of its light output.
All right, so maybe you grow a run and it's really good.
And that's why you relamp and you
Yeah.
and you replace your reflectors, because your reflectors, they get, and when you start getting into metallurgy, any of the nutrients or any overspray or any of the gases or anything else like that, it starts to decrease the reflectivity of that aluminum extrusion that they're using to bounce the light everywhere around to get you that nice spread.
You get that nice crusty, salty oxidation on there.
So those are just some things to consider. My advice to you is, if you can at the moment, try to start looking at an LED fixture to replace the T5s you have in place already. But if you're not at that point of wanting to replace to an LED, get some new tubes.
I'm at the point where I don't even want to grow anymore until I fix it.
Yeah, so that would probably be your best
Until you
bet.
what? What was that?
I don't even want to grow anymore until I fix some issues, because it's just a lot of effort for...
Yeah, you spend a lot of time going, what's wrong
Yeah,
here?
you'd be like, you gotta wait. No, I'm out, man. That stuff is so crappy, I don't want nobody smoking.
Call us.
Yeah. And a lot of people like the tents because...
Or turn it into edible medicine or something.
Yeah, but a lot of people like the tents because they're designed with the same material that photographers use to reduce shadows and effects when they're outside taking pictures, or even inside taking pictures. So that reflectivity of how the light's going to bounce off it, it's going to hit your plant as it moves in all its different directions, because light travels like this. So if you're growing in your basement, take a look at your walls. What kind of walls do you have? Are you like my parents do, where they have concrete slab walls, and you're looking at your reflectance dropping from almost 90% down to 30 or 40%.
Yeah.
No, even worse than that.
And the concrete?
The concrete.
Yeah.
Concrete has a low reflectivity rate, because what it's going to do is it's going to absorb all that light. So you might think, hey, I'm probably going to get 1,000 on this flower. I'm going to get 1,000 micromoles on this flower. Well, it's sitting right next to a dark gray concrete wall, and that concrete wall is absorbing a lot of that bandwidth from that light
and your plant's gonna suffer from it as well.
We don't have that. We've got a dedicated room, not much bigger than a, average sized bedroom. We've got it all sealed off with the white plastic.
Okay.
and
Right,
other
so-
stuff.
Yeah, so if you're doing
Panda
that,
film?
then you're looking
We've
at,
got everything.
Yeah.
So we was gonna do a tent, tents are too restrictive.
no,
I
and
need
if you
room
do,
to get
if
in
you do the
there.
white plastic, then that's the
Yeah,
best
it's
way
on
to
the,
do it.
it's everywhere. It's in front of the door that you get in. We open the door, we shut the door. We got the
Yeah.
door sealed off on the outside. It's a dedicated room.
Yeah, that's a smart
Now-
way to do it.
Yeah,
with
that's a
the
great way to do it. One thing I do recommend though, is when your plants are in their nighttime mode and they're asleep, don't open the door with the hallway light on them.
No,
Because a lot of people don't realize that that light from that exterior source, it might not be that much to you. And it might not show on the plant spectrum, but those little reds that are in that light, because and I'm going from plant lighting to commercial lighting, because it's around 2700 Kelvin. Well, now you're starting to look at being on this spectrum of the plant's wavelength. Or it's, you've got a bright white, and if you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and you see it's got warm white, it's got cool white, and it's got daylight, those are how our eyes perceive it, but how the plants perceive it is something completely different. And you can actually wake that plant up in the middle of its cycle and screw up all the planning that you've had for your photosynthesis and really getting that plant to go.
Yep.
Didn't realize that something as simple as your green exit sign
Yeah.
can do a lot. Yeah.
Not a green exit sign, but like
Yeah,
a red
the-
exit sign.
the red exit
So they're
sign.
going to green exit
Glowing
sign.
green.
But Mary had a question really quick.
Yeah, about the green light. So how does the green light go out? I guess Aaron explained it.
It doesn't, actually.
It
That's
doesn't,
the
so
beauty.
when it's in that sleeping stage and that green wavelength of those lights, and look at making sure that they have some kind of spectrum, because there's a lot of manufacturers out there like Acuity or, anybody, they'll put out a green exit sign. But that green exit sign is basically a green film in front of white LEDs, phosphorus coated LEDs. So at that point, it doesn't exactly measure up. We see it as green, but the plant could see it as something else because it's taking into account the phosphorus coating and it's also taking into account that filter. Everybody knows when you look at a color wheel, you start mixing colors together, something else happens. The same thing happens when you start looking at just generic green exit signs. So look for an exit sign that actually shows where it sits on the spectrum to make sure you're within that 540, 550 nanometer space. And I mean, it's a very small space, but it's necessity. As far as, let's say you want to go in there and you want to change out the nutrients and how they're going to be running the next day, and you're just fiddling with some stuff, checking CO2 levels or anything else like that, and you still want to be able to see while you work. That's when you start looking at those green vapor tights that have that spectrum, so you can still see. They start calling it task lighting or green exit sign if you're in a larger commercial facility. But that's so people can still do those after hours works and not bother the plants and not risk any chance of shocking them.
All right. When you're starting out with new growth, new plants, you want to spray them for bugs. So it's dark. You want to spray them before the lights come on, at least an hour or so, right? So what do? You
Great.
can't see squat in that.
You use
light.
green light.
Okay,
Mary,
I have a 4-foot fluorescent box store-bought LED light that I have the light facing the corner. So there's very minimum light that I plug in just to give a little bit of it's very minimum because this light is wedged in the corner.
yeah, it's still dangerous though.
It's still dangerous
Well, I'm
because
finding that out. I
it's
didn't
still
know
dangerous
that.
because you're looking at that light probably
Do you have
is
green lights?
at 3,500 Kelvin on your visible spectrum. So it's almost like a neutral in between, a real comfortable, cool, like warm, like you would see in a hotel, or when we turn the lights back on out here.
Yeah, when I found these, I mean, they make headlamps, they make little flashlights. It's just a green LED. And so the actual emission point itself is green. Way back in the day, somebody said to me, a pin drop of light can cause a hermaphrodite. And that stuck with me, right? If it needs to be completely sealed in darkness and a pin drop of light's coming in, What's actually happening in a cannabis plant is it's affecting the hormones. And so that's because that blue range or the red range, as Danny is saying, that in here it's not affecting those chlorophyll hormones, so it's not affecting photosynthesis, but also stabilized genetics are what are they're going to be a lot safer than working with something that hasn't been stabilized, which will cause what's called nanners. They're like little bananas that pop out. And those little bananas that pop out are reproductive portions of the plant that can actually kick off pollen and pollinate your whole thing. So I had one plant do that one time because of a tiny door being cracked open, and somebody went into this long hallway, turned on the hallway light, and it kicked in and shot straight through and hit that one plant in the corner. About 4 or 5 days later, at the end of the flowering cycle, I think it was week 7, there's these little bananas popping up on it everywhere, you know. And it was my first time seeing it years ago. It was probably 8 or 9 years ago. And I'm looking at it, I'm going, okay, well, this is kind of weird. But I let it go too long. And pollen is super tiny. So one of those tiny little sacs opening up ended up breeding with everything and seeding out my whole grow. And causing seeds to pop up on the plants that didn't get hit with light. So
I have a couple more light questions.
no, you're good.
Let me piggyback off of what he said as well. And I learned this from somebody that's a grower and is very, very adamant about how his light is, because he was smart, he's learned, and he abides by almost every rule there is in the book about how light reacts to plants. All your plants that are going to flower are women. They're all women. And that pinpoint of light, though you didn't mean to piss her off, every other woman in that room's going to hear about it. True?
So it's typical.
It's typical. So you could have a plant, let's say you have a large facility where you have like 500 pots of plants sitting there. And you've got the girl by the front door, and somebody opened that door and accidentally shut it really quick, but she got pissed off because you woke her up while she was sleeping. Anybody not like to be woken up like at 2 o'clock in the morning? Well, maybe her best friend is the plant clear on the other side of the room. She's going to let that plant, they talk to each other. She's going to let that plant on the other side of the room know, hey, let me piss me off. But in order for that plant over there to hear it, it's going to be a telephone game amongst each and every one of them until they hit that desired person. This is why women go to the bathroom and flock. Plants going to do the same thing. They're going to talk, and they're going to let you know what's going on. But your next question.
Okay. Like I said, my room is walled off in plastic. 90% of it is. I have a 4-foot area,
Like a
the
walkway?
length of the room. And in there, I have all my chemicals and my water barrel. I have automatic feeding system.
Okay.
Well, occasionally, you try to fill a barrel up when the lights are on, and try to do everything when the lights are on. But occasionally, you come home late, you forgot, oh, it's already Sunday, it's after midnight, the lights are off, I need to fill this up. So I've been going in there in a dark room, and it's plastic off. And I pull the plastic, and I pull the plastic back. And again, I got another 4-foot LED hanging from the ceiling so I can see in the water barrel.
Yeah,
Does
but
it
see
cause
what
a problem?
it potentially could cause a problem, because you got to realize you're using this white plastic, and what's the primary reason you chose that white plastic? Is for its reflectivity.
Well, sure, but
in
the
addition to
back side of it is
yeah.
black. I'm on the black side of the plastic.
You still have a chance that something could peek through.
Especially if there's a pinhole or a little.
There's a pinhole, maybe you brushed up against it wrong, maybe you rubbed it, and there's a thin little. Anybody ever go pet a dog or a cat, and you think everything's going well, and then you height of COVID, you walk into a building, you hand sanitize, and you're like, oh, and your hands start burning. It's the same thing. You could have just the slightest little slit in there, and it'll let the light go.
So you should use this if you have to go in.
Yeah, definitely.
You should definitely use a green light.
A reason that you might not be seeing that happen all the time is it takes 45 minutes for cannabis hormones to transition over. So if you just had a light turned on, you're filling up.
For like 8 minutes.
Yeah, so then in that case you might actually not see the issue happen, but you don't want to, you want to set yourself up, you know.
And this is few and far between. Just
Yeah,
occasionally
but
you're
it's
like,
just-
damn it, I forgot.
Yeah.
It's one of those better, it's why we all have car insurance.
Well,
Not everybody's gonna get into an accident when we get out of here,
Yeah, green lights are, I used to hang them from my light, you know, an extra one in there in case I was like stuck in there, lights turn off on me. I go, uh-oh, I can't see anything, you know. I know this is up here and just click it on.
What kind of a light? Just
Green light specifically,
I
so
know,
in
you
this
get a green
this
light
range
bulb.
right
We got
here.
green light bulbs from our Christmas. They're
I wouldn't use the green light bulbs.
Again, just the film.
Yeah, because it's just
Not
a film.
necessarily green light.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
White light covered in the green film,
that could chip
you may
off.
see green, but they're not.
Can you green
Right.
film over that LED fluorescent 4-foot light I have?
I wouldn't
No.
either.
that's a good investment right there, you know.
Yeah.
It's something
I'm not
that's
worried
cheap
about
and
it.
I mean,
simple.
you could,
$15.
you
I'm
could,
just
I
asking
mean,
these
yeah, you
questions.
could.
Could I?
Yeah.
You know.
Could, but it's still one of those things, like I said, these are white phosphorus coated. Most LEDs that are on the commercial side are white phosphorus coated because they have, you know, a certain color, how they were bent, what the color temperature was on them.
Now, if I
And then-
turn on that LED in the water tank room while the lights are on, is that a problem?
No, you should be fine.
7 or 8 minutes?
You should be fine.
Okay.
You should be fine. It's just
also-
waking them up while they're sleeping.
See those ones there? Those are white light covered with a green film, you know, so you could always replace
Well,
the,
you can buy them.
yeah, definitely. But having one of those hanging in your room, it's actually producing green light out of the emission source
I
itself.
meant just
So
to turn it on to see while you're doing something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah, you could buy
highly
those too.
recommend against it, but I've looked at more large-scale grows and have seen bad things happen because somebody made a bad mistake. And you lose an entire room, and if you've got a 5,000 square foot room just filled with plants, and you lose every single one of them,
No, I just saw it.
you know, each one of those plants is worth anywhere between $2,000 to $5,000.
yeah, fun fact, once they start to seed out, all that energy that's going to creating the cannabinoid, so say your plant's finishing at 30% is what you're looking for, 30% cannabinoids, THC or CBD, whatever it is you're growing. Half of that energy goes from those crystals, the cannabinoid, to the seed. So that 30% will drop to 18 or 15%. So essentially, even if you take all of that and you run it through an extraction process, instead of getting 30% per gram, you're getting 15%, having to do twice the extraction processing out of that. So just making sure that you don't interrupt that night cycle. Again, it does take typically about 45 minutes. I have flipped lights on and off before accidentally, or had a friend walk in there and flip it on in the middle, and I just walked over and turned it off and everything was okay. Yeah. But having a good green flashlight, because we know that right here you can see on this graph, it's not going to react to these hormone centers right here.
Right about here.
So having that 550 range, 525 right in here.
I don't mind spending the money and doing it right, as long as I know what's right. I would have had no clue.
No,
Yeah.
no, I get it, but
If I wouldn't have been here.
Glad to have you. Thank you for asking the good questions
you
too.
didn't learn something when you walked away, then we did something wrong.
It happens.
No, did you have another question?
No,
or anything?
I'm done.
Oh, keep going. Keep going. We're having fun.
I'm done for this
Not about you. Any questions as far as?
I mean, I don't know what questions to ask. That's what I'm here to learn.
No, you're good.
I'm starting out, I'm clay right now, just trying to learn stuff.
Get you-
Yeah, I mean, enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah.
Enjoy working with the plants. Enjoy seeing
I did
the different
in the
things.
beginning, but now it's just kind of disappointing after disappointment. I'm just ready to throw all my stuff out.
Might have something to do with some bulbs that are 3 years old.
Oh, it's got, nothing to do with that.
Yeah, and again, you still use that fixture. Replace those bulbs. Start your clones. Upgrade to a good light, or just start some clones and put them outside and still get your growth, still enjoy your plants, still get your return, and then take that return and invest it in good indoor where you can keep things going.
I'm gonna get rid of them.
Yeah, so sometimes as growers we gotta figure out the bits and pieces. So. But again, the key is have fun, enjoy what you're doing, and it's probably what got you into it. I mean, a lot of people go, this seems exciting, I want to grow a plant. If you jump this far in, to me, it's been quite, it's been quite the ride. There's been lots of times where I've been overthinking things or underthinking things, and it comes from a lot of that trial and error, and that's what brought that process about and learning. So.
Well, it's like Simone here, she grows an outdoor garden every year, and last year it was like a terrible experience. A hailstorm came in, a couple of the plants got damaged.
Yeah, and this is outdoor. Think about this. Well, I have outdoor, I have a greenhouse, and we have indoor as well. But outdoor, I had, after the hailstorm, one of the plants gets stressed out.
Yeah.
And that's what she was talking about. Nothing, no problem with any others. And I was like, I'm going to try it, you know, kind of nurse it back, whatever. Nope. 4 days later, exactly. It was like 3 other plants on the other end. You know, at that point, I literally just derooted everything, threw them out. I was like, no way.
But she's getting ready to plant again.
Yep.
So she had a major setback last year.
Yeah.
But now it's about time to get started again. And she's going to give it another try. Because everybody's going to have setbacks. You're going to figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
I'm going to stand outside with sheets over my plants.
So,
So I mean, you never know. If you keep the fixture, you get some new bulbs. Maybe you're back to where you were at 3 years ago.
to get this.
Or get this,
That's what I'm saying.
They're
You know that
$30
this
a
will
bulb,
get
and there's 8 bulbs in one
Yep.
fixture, and I got 2 fixtures.
And you're going to have to replace them again.
And the great thing is
And
if you,
then you gotta pay to get rid of them, because you can't just throw them things in the
Exactly.
trash. They gotta take gas
And you know you're going to have to do it
mercury.
again in a few years.
So that's why I'm here now.
Technically, it would save you money in the long run,
It would
absolutely.
save
And you
me-
get a bigger
it
yield.
would save me money now.
Exactly.
and then speaking on darkness, something else to consider is growing outdoors. We have full moons. Those create light. You know, there's still 5 or 50 PPFD coming down in the middle of the night on a full moon. And the plant's not reacting to that. So there's a little bit of back and forth of can a plant get used to a little bit of light over time.
some
But
people are also using it as a means to grow their plants
during the night,
during the night.
you gotta get some mirrors and reflect that full moon
They're
back.
trying to maximize on like in grow houses and stuff like that. There's some people out there that are realizing that there are effects of the moon on the plants, and it's literally like moon lighting.
Well, there's,
You know, I
Yeah.
had to find this stinking article about it.
there's
My last name's Luna, which means moon. So anything that has anything to do with the moon, I'm like,
Look at the big sign behind you.
yeah, that's her company.
yeah, the commercial side of what we do is called Luna lighting.
So there's Luna lighting and Luna cultivation. So she also does high bay lighting, so like manufacturing, commercial lighting, and that's what Stan's handled for a really long time. He's been with the company for 26 years now. So like BMW in South Carolina, they're lights that light their facility. Stan put those in there, and she also does that with Luna lighting as
Yeah.
well.
I came from
so.
the commercial lighting side of things, so working with people like Stan that are manufacturers, or Andrew who works for a distributor, and I learned that side of lighting, became a lighting nerd, found out about grow lighting, especially, so my background is I was in the military. I went to war, I got shot at, I came back home. The VA was more than happy to help me out, and I would get bags of medications in the mail. And I have a wonderful friend, Miss Simona here. Her and her fiance were very much into CBD and everything else like that when it finally became legal. And they were like, "Hey, you should try this out." And I did, and it was a lot better than pulling up the Quick Trip and circling the gas pump 8 times because I couldn't, like, mentally could not get a grasp on. Here's the pump, and here's where my tank hole is at, and I can't figure out how to get there. So that's when I became passionate, got more into grow and everything else like that, but I realized there's a gap between a lot of segments. So there's a big gap between the commercial lighting segment and the grow lighting segment. So that's when I came up with lumens are for humans. Because a lot of people, when they look at light, they want to look, well, how many lumens does this have? Well, you don't want to look at a grow picture and go, well, how many lumens does this have? Because that grow picture that's got 2100 ppf, it's got like 100,000 lumens blasting out of it, which is same thing as like if you look at the street light on Lindbergh and you were to put your face right up to it, that's what it would be like putting your face straight up to a grow light, that's designed for flower. It's about the same thing. So
I guess I didn't really mention that where lumens come from. It was a 1/6 of a pound wax candle burning at 190 grains per minute, and that single candle's light is 1 candela, which is 1 lumen. And then people had different candles and different styles of candles, and so they used platinum and divided it by 60 because platinum burning, it was at the exact same. It's not like the candles had a difference in burn rate or brightness. So they started burning platinum and then dividing that by 60, and that became the international standard for candlelight, or a lumen. And then that's why
looking at a foot candle, it's exactly how much
or
light.
1 foot, yeah.
1 foot away from the source of the candle.
Yep.
That's why I laugh when I watch movies and they've got one candle and they're walking through the building.
So,
I was like, that does not work that way.
so Stan speaks in lumens most of the time when he's lighting facilities, just for general working facilities or task lighting. I generally speak in PPFD, and Danny speaks in both. So
I am really good at the conversion from grow to commercial. I'm about as fluent in that as I am in Spanglish.
See,
order a hell of a chicken.
So can she, but she only knows 12 words of Spanish.
She does.
She sounds fluent when she orders one. Well,
Fake it till you make it, right?
I mean,
I still go.
I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, you know, we can hang out and talk.
It's got my cell on it, so if you guys have a question, you're standing in front of a light fixture and you're ready to shop.
Yeah, it's my business card's
Want
hers.
an unbiased opinion, give me a call. I'm unbiased.
I'm on there too.
Thank you, everyone.
Reach out with any questions, so if you have any further questions,
I've been growing
we're
out
all here to help
for the
you
past 3
guys.
years because my room is not flash. I don't have